It's terrifying to watch this play out over the course of weeks.
Of the Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos.
He devastated his nation's economy while reveling in personal luxury and extravagance.
You might remember his wife Imelda's famous affinity for shoes. Marcos ran the nation's economy like a mob boss, doling out entire industries to his friends, while punishing his enemies with the power of his government.
Marcos plundered the national economy and left the people nearly bankrupt.
Along the way, he pocketed a king's ransom, $10 billion by one estimate.
I love tariffs. Beautiful tariffs. The word tariff to me is the most beautiful word in the entire dictionary.
With tariffs, President Trump can wield enormous power over America's economy, bringing some businesses to their knees, while empowering other companies with valuable exemptions. And if you don't think this kind of corrupt favoritism can happen in modern-day America, it already did during Trump's first term.
We will have a 25% tariff on foreign steel.
In 2018 and 2019, President Trump slapped big tariffs on steel, aluminum, and on China. And a tariff exemption process was created for American companies that could show that they would be greatly harmed by the tariffs. An exemption could mean the difference between survival and extinction for a business. And so, a great lobbying boom began.
The exemptions were where the action was in the first term.
Trade-related lobbying spiked over 50%, hitting an all-time record.
They petitioned for exemptions. They petitioned for special treatment. They petitioned to be part of the inner circle.
Around 500,000 exemption requests were filed, overwhelming understaffed government agencies. The government's decisions were often arbitrary and baffling, favoring Bibles over textbooks and children's car seats over cribs, as the New York Times reported.
This is not a moment where the merits of the case in terms of economic growth have as much currency as we'd like to hope that they do. There was a lot of favoritism involved.
Tim Cook of Apple wooed Trump directly.
It takes government, private sector, and education.
And got exemptions for iPhones and watches. All too often, the game of tariff exemption roulette came down to politics. A study of nearly 7,000 exemption requests found that companies that made political donations to Republicans had twice as much success as companies donating to Democrats. The tariff exemption process allowed the government to reward its political friends and punish its enemies, the study said, in what it called a very effective spoil system. One of the authors told CNN there was clear evidence of corruption.
You have to petition the supreme ruler for access and for exemptions.
When one of President Trump's companies was applying for trademarks in Argentina, he implemented tariffs on the country and then withdrew them, and then the trademarks were approved. American fireworks companies faced big tariffs, but after two companies donated roughly $750,000 worth of their services to Trump's 2019 Independence Day extravaganza, Trump delayed the tariffs. A tariff exemption was even granted to the American subsidiary of a sanctioned Russian company with ties to Vladimir Putin until the decision was reversed after an outcry. The Trump administration, Trump's company, and the fireworks companies denied that there was any quid pro quo with the tariffs. Tariffs and protectionism have long been a part of the autocrat's playbook. A recent book documents the decades-long unholy trinity between authoritarians, crony capitalism, and protectionism. Ferdinand Marcos drew on that formula to build his autocracy. So did the PRI in Mexico, Juan Perón in Argentina, and Francisco Franco in fascist Spain. These days, it's a trend that's become the new normal all over the world. Even in America, the authors of the book warn.
Because I'm able to do it. There'll be a little disturbance. We're okay with that.
Trump 2.0 appears to be an even bigger gold rush for favoritism than Trump's first term. Spending on trade lobbying spiked nearly 300% in the first few months of 2025 compared to 2024. There was no formal application process for tariff exemptions. The decisions were being made behind closed doors. And it is happening in an administration that is threatening media companies, law firms, universities, and even private individuals, using the powers of the federal government to help friends and punish foes.
There can be permanent tariffs and there could also be negotiations.
Trump's tariffs may look like they are just bad economics, but their effects are also to create very bad politics. Coming up, my closing thoughts on these big, beautiful tariffs.
Tech for Good, in association with Samsung.
This is a tiny robot that weighs less than a gram. It mimics how a bee moves and even sounds. It was made by these guys at MIT's Micro Robotics Lab.
Inspired by nature, our team developed micro-scale robots that can hop or fly into very tiny spaces.
All the components are made in-house, and there's no room for error.
Sometimes, even 10 microns of error can make the whole mechanics completely different.
They hope tiny robots can be used in search and rescue and for artificial pollination in the next 15 years. But first, their next challenge is to install batteries and sensors so it could one day fly autonomously out of the lab.
We all want to eat better, but sometimes it's hard to know how. I left behind fine dining to place professional chefs with public schools to help them cook healthy meals. It's about being resourceful with what you have available. Samsung's Family Hub makes life a little easier. With AI Vision inside, it scans what I've got, tells me what's about to expire, and suggestions on what to make. With the right knowledge and help from technology, making healthy choices gets a whole lot easier.
Angola is a hidden gem, full of potential. We look forward to welcoming you back, time and time again, now and in the future. Angola awaits.
I'm Ivan Watson in Hong Kong. This is CNN.
We need to go. We need to go.
Why?
Because you're in the fire film.
Sorry?
We need to go.
Why?
No.
Why am I not allowed to come? For the rescue team here, this really is a race against time. The village of Imiatella was among the hardest hit by the earthquake.
These volunteers are simply elated that they can do something to help.
This is the face of Israeli settler violence in the occupied West Bank. They beat us and try to kill us. I can't sleep anymore. I'm too afraid.
For the last 12 weeks, we have seen people taking to the streets in Paris in protest against this reformed huge crowd of gathered here to celebrate the release of Palestinian prisoners and detainees.
We'll rebuild everything, even if we have to start from zero. They say the Turkish families come first. Aren't we all one? This earthquake affected all of us. Aren't we all brothers and sisters?
This is CNN.
And now for some of my own closing thoughts. When we talk about tariffs, we always focus on the economic arguments for and against them. And as you know, I think the economic arguments are mostly against. But I think there's a larger point that is often missed. It is about the vision of society in the world that tariffs represent. Open versus closed. Positive sum versus zero sum. It might be easier to make this point by looking at the history. When Franklin Roosevelt led the United States during World War II, he thought hard about the kind of world he wanted America to shape after the war. He had seen the peace and prosperity of the 1920s founder as narrow nationalism turned into protectionism, military rivalry, and war. He believed that the world would only be peaceful if countries found they had much to gain from that peace. He was not naive about international cooperation. He knew that the great powers had to be given special status and privilege so they'd be invested in maintaining the peace. But he fervently believed that the competitive economic nationalism of the 1930s, symbolized by America's own Smoot-Hawley tariffs, had led the world down a dangerous path of competition and war. So he determined that America would shape a post-war international order that was open, rules-based, and gave nations opportunities to trade with one another, cooperate economically, and grow rich through this peaceful commerce. That vision was then implemented by FDR's proteges in the Truman administration after Roosevelt died. It led to the creation of the United Nations and many bodies of international cooperation, and also the emergence of a system of mostly free trade for goods and capital. The United States was generous in its approach. It opened its markets and gave aid and loans so that Western Europe and parts of Asia could rebuild from the ashes of World War II. As they did, they too opened up their markets, which in turn provided opportunities for American businesses to sell their products. The system proved good for Western Europe and East Asia, but also for America. It helped make America's allies strong and dynamic, thus laying the conditions for victory in the Cold War. It also helped American businesses to dominate the world, from General Electric and General Motors to IBM and Procter & Gamble to Microsoft, Google, and Apple. And crucially, it made the dollar the reserve currency of the world, allowing the US to borrow money on favorable terms. That exorbitant privilege confers a benefit to the average American, whose credit card rates and mortgage payments are lower thanks to the dollar's global status. So America was generous, but it could also have been called long-term greedy. It built a system that helped others, but also helped itself stay rich and powerful for decades. The proof is in the numbers. As parts of Asia, like China, have risen from dirt poverty to great wealth, that has changed the balance of power among nations, except for one country. The United States, 45 years ago, was about 25% of global GDP. And today, it is roughly the same number, in fact, slightly higher. America created a win-win world in which others prospered and America stayed strong. It wasn't a world without problems. The communist world refused to participate in the more free trade system and stood in opposition within the UN and other fora. But it lost that struggle, and by the early 1990s, much of the world was headed in the American direction. seeing that vision as a better path for peace and prosperity. China tried to grow within that system but stayed unreformed in some crucial ways. That challenge has to be dealt with, and Beijing needs to be confronted or isolated for some of its actions. Other countries like Brazil and India stay deeply protectionist, and they need to be encouraged to open up. But none of these problems required that the United States abandon the entire 80-year project of building, sustaining, and stabilizing a world based on open trade, on rules, and on cooperation. There is no better vision on offer, simply a return to narrow self-interest, nationalist competition, and economic protectionism that leaves everyone poorer and the world more unstable. But that is the new vision of the populists in Washington. My greatest hope now comes from watching other countries who are dealing with Washington as best they can, but not going down its path of protectionism. They know that they need more trade, not less, to raise their people's incomes and standards of living. They're making trade deals with each other, working around Washington to forge new ties. It's the ultimate vindication of the vision that America offered the world, that as Washington has lost faith in it, the rest of the world has not. They are holding the American lit torch, perhaps hoping that one day America will come back and lift it up again, believing once again in its own ideas and ideals. Thank you for watching this special hour. I'm Fareed Zakaria. Welcome to Disconnected, Life in a Disruptive Digital Age. I'm Fareed Zakaria, and this is a GPS special. Social connection is one of the most important human needs. It starts immediately after birth, when babies go skin to skin with a parent, later when we make our first friend, and later still when we find our tribe. That is connection. People make love connections and declare their love in front of family and friends. But in today's world, much of what I've just described is unraveling.
Many are finding themselves lonelier than ever.
Far greater sense of isolation.
More people are missing that connection.
Loneliness and isolation.
Concerns that we have to prioritize.
Loneliness is on the rise.
Marriage rates are near all-time lows in America. 1 in 5 people report feeling lonely every day, and the number of Americans who say they have no close friends has quadrupled in the last 3 decades. Why is this happening? It is a tumultuous time in the world. We did, after all, just live through a dangerous and disruptive pandemic.
All 50 states now have COVID cases.
The West has country is the United States.
The world surpassing 1 million deaths from the coronavirus.
War and strife and deep political division glare from the headlines every day.
Israeli government plan to occupy the whole of Gaza.
Famine thresholds have been reached.
Russia has pummeled Kyiv with drones.
Republicans issuing civil arrest warrants.
I hate them too, you know?
The deadline for a government shutdown now just days away.
And then there are those supercomputers in our pockets, which may just be more interesting than any kind of face-to-face human relationship. We'll explore our disconnectedness and how to get reconnected in this next hour. I want to start this hour where life begins and where increasingly both the ever-present screens and the isolation begin as well. Childhood. Social psychologist Jonathan Haidt is a professor of ethical leadership at NYU. He has written the defining book on the generation that grew up with technology in the palms of their hands. The Anxious Generation has been on the New York Times bestseller list for over a year. Jonathan Haidt, welcome.
Fareed, pleasure to be with you.
So you talk in your book about this very big shift that takes place where we move away from play-based childhood at one point, and then we move toward a kind of technology-based childhood. Explain those two shifts.
Sure. So my book isn't really about social media, it's really about childhood. And children need to play and take risks and run around and practice adult skills. And childhood is an evolutionary product. It's part of the path from childhood to adulthood. We have to go through it. But we did a weird and tragic thing in America, and it turns out in much of the West, in which first we kind of stopped letting our kids out. We lose the play-based childhood in the 1990s for a variety of reasons. We become overprotective. We don't let kids out to play. We think they'll get abducted. We think they'll be hit by a car.
Is that even true in Europe, where there was much less of a fear of crime?
It's much less true, and in Scandinavia and Northern Europe, they still let their kids out at age 8. But as one Finnish journalist told me, yeah, we let our kids out early, and they walk around looking down at their phones.
So that gets us to part 2.
That's right. So part 2, so the technology is coming in since the 80s. Video games are getting more enticing, but you have to sit in your basement to play the video games. You can't be playing the video game when you're walking around or on the school bus. And so it's really, once we get everyone gets a personal device, a touch screen, and that really happens between 2010 and 2015 is when kids change from basic phones or flip phones. So I call this the arrival of the phone-based childhood. And at first we all thought, well, they're connecting to each other, it's going to be good. But it turns out that we're biological creatures, we're humans. We have to be with people physically, as you and I are right now. Zoom is better than nothing, but kids have to touch each other, and they have to share laughter and share food. And if they're just swiping, it doesn't substitute. And so when kids went through puberty, this is the real thing, the key thing. When kids began going through puberty, when the brain is changing very rapidly, on a touch screen, on social media, rather than in the lunchroom arguing and playing and flirting and all those things that kids have always done, that seems to be what created Gen Z. Kids born after 1996 have much higher levels of anxiety, depression, self-harm, and suicide.
Particularly among women, right?
Yes, those numbers go up more for girls and women, yes.
Explain to me why the technology does what it does, in your opinion, because I noticed this. The smartphone, which is essentially really a supercomputer, allows you to stay connected to people all the time. But the result of it, I find, is that I have stopped talking on the phone with some of my friends who don't live in New York. Mm-hmm. And paradoxically, the effect is I feel less in contact with them, but the phone, actually, the physical human voice, the long conversation that I would have 20 years ago, connected me much more than just the constant little texting that, you feel like you're in touch, but actually you don't know the person as well.
That's right. Because our relationships require synchronous communication. So talking on the phone is really good. It's I say something, you say something, we laugh. So synchronous is good. One-on-one is good, whereas one-to-many is bad. When kids are, if they're talking on the phone to a friend, that's great. And FaceTime or Zoom is very good too if it's one-on-one. But now so many kids are spending a lot of time on these group chats. It's one-to-many. It's not, you're worried about what you say. Yeah. You're worried if you
performing.
It's performative, exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's also the question of depth. Like when you meet a friend and you have a meal together and you're talking for an hour, you just go much deeper than if it's just passing on the street. And a lot of electronic communication is the equivalent of passing on the street. So for all these reasons, we didn't know this in 2010, 2012. We didn't know what we were doing to kids. But we basically allowed the tech companies to rewire childhood, take control of it. They own our children's attention. Half of our kids say that they are online almost constantly. 5 hours a day is the average for social media, if you include TikTok and YouTube. So these companies now own our children's childhood. Our children are not developing well. If you're born after 1995, or even 96 and on is Gen Z, if you're born in that cohort, you had most of your human experience taken away from you. So you ask, how does the technology do this? The simplest method is just by pushing everything else out. And so if the average kid is spending 8 hours a day on touchscreen devices, not counting schoolwork, that has to come from somewhere. And where does it come from? Time with friends. Kids are spending a lot less time with their friends than they used to. Time outside, sleep, exercise. So you push all these healthy things out, you're going to have a lot less health. Then there's so many other ways that being on social media, growing up in a sense in the center of the Roman Colosseum with fans cheering for conflict and bloodshed or whatever,